The Bills lost to the Chiefs over the weekend, and as a Bills fan, after a few days to digest what happened, I cannot help but think that there's important things to point out about what finally needs to change with this team. It's kind of felt like we've been spinning for about 4 years now with the AFC title game in 2020 and then losing in the divisional round 3 years in a row. And at this point in time, I feel like the burden of the issue falls on Brandon Beane. A few years ago, with a 13-second game losing to the Chiefs, it felt like the defense we played was Sean McDermott's fault, and you could point back to the issues that occurred basically being his fault. But realistically now, I don't see a lot of coaching points where I am seeing things where I'm like, that's a fireable offense in terms of just how poorly he's coaching the game. The same day, we had Sean McDermott coaching the Bills in a loss against the Chiefs. We had Dan Campbell and Todd Bowles coaching in the other NFL divisional game that was occurring that day, where Todd Bowles decided to not pay attention at the end of the game to see whether or not he could get his team the ball back, and Dan Campbell had his team decide to not wait to run the play clock down. My assumption was, watching the game, that the timeout on the scoreboard must have been wrong and that the Buccaneers must have not actually had a timeout left. Otherwise, the Lions wouldn't have been so careless snapping the ball so quickly. But they really both had much worse offenses in the last few years about what they did with their team. I think an important note with that, actually, is that kind of over time, one of the things that can really be undervalued about being a coach at any level of the sport is that coaches can actually learn from themselves over time. So if you get a coach, and this is one of the things that I was kind of worried about with Brandon Staley back in the day, he had a really good system with the Rams. But you knew once he became a coach somewhere else that he would have to adapt because he did not have the defensive line. He had to be playing with so many secondary players playing so deep consistently. And it really seemed to backfire on him. But if coaches are willing to learn, and I think one of Sean McDermott's strongest traits really is that he's willing to learn, I think that that can be so advantageous for so many different coaches. If you see your coach learns from his mistakes, and in the first place he wasn't making that many mistakes, that's a great thing. The one caveat there being, okay, but if you have a coach that's making mistakes and it's making it so that the players don't even believe in him anymore, then obviously you can't continue with him. But there's no doubt the players still believe in Sean McDermott. So with that, you kind of have to look at roster construction with the Bills and just think to yourself, what has Brandon Beane done to actually produce a roster that is going to help? Basically, let's look at it. I mean, Allen's lost to Mahomes and Burrow the last 4 years in playoff games. So where's Allen's help? And when you look at the help Josh Allen has, it's pitiful. And kind of one of the other points that gets to with how this NFL season played out, you can look at it from the perspective of Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy had a tremendous season this year. Tremendous. But with that being said, one of the things before the Baltimore game, it feels like the entire world is focused on Lamar Jackson now winning the MVP. That probably makes sense when you look at the full sample size of the season, and I don't even really think it's that wildly contested. I haven't even heard anybody say that there could have been many votes for any other players. But when Brock Purdy was still competing for that before the Ravens beat the Niners, I was really frustrated by that because I thought, who is actually the best player on his position at that team? And I thought it was Christian McCaffrey this year at that point in time. I still think that that's relatively true, but I think the MVP needs to go to Lamar with how the season played out from that point on. And looking at that, let's compare the 49ers roster to the Bills roster and actually talk about where the Bills could say that they have A to A+ talent at any position besides the quarterback position. And I think the simple thing is that if you look at the 49ers, if you look at Christian McCaffrey, heck, you could throw Kyle Juszczyk in here. I wasn't thinking about him, but let's throw him in here for this. He's definitely not as important of a player because he's playing fullback, but let's throw him in. McCaffrey, Juszczyk, Kittle, Samuel, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, and Fred Warner. And let's even say the head coach, Kyle Shanahan. They probably are all the best at their position now, or at one point in time were the best at their position at some point in the NFL. And none of those guys are even out of their prime except Juszczyk, who I tacked on the end. He's probably getting towards the end of his career. But if you have that in mind, how in the world do you look at the 49ers, and especially knowing that, well, Shanahan wanted to move on from Garoppolo. Shanahan apparently recently revealed through Brock Purdy accidentally, but Brock Purdy revealed it, that he still wanted Tom Brady to be the starting quarterback this season for the 49ers if Brady was willing to be. How can you come to the conclusion that what happened with Jimmy Garoppolo the last few years and then switching to Brock Purdy, that Brock Purdy was the most valuable player in the league? It's a lot better argument for Josh Allen, because I just named 7, maybe 8 guys for the 49ers who are A-plus talent on their team. And Brandon Beane, the guy got so lucky in terms of his best draft pick being Josh Allen. And that helps so much, because once you have the quarterback position, it's great. It's great. But the roster construction beyond that has just been absolutely horrible. And I think the thing that bothers me even more about it is the fact that he has somehow managed to not look at guys in the NFL like somewhere between 24 to 27-year-old players looking for their second contract who are hitting the prime of their career in free agency. He has decided that he will keep his guys in that age range, but if he goes out and finds talent, it's going to be a 32, 33-year-old Von Miller. Like, he just expects the body to always hold up for all the players that he acquires for the Bills. Like, oh my God, I just saw this guy in his prime, not the guys who are building to it. And that sentiment seems to exist beyond Brandon Beane, kind of, within you just look back a few years ago at the receiver debate about people saying who the best receivers were in the game at that time, and it was just like, they're all talking about people who were great like last season or 2 years ago, but people were coming on at that point in time. Even A.J. Brown, while he was playing for the Titans still, was coming on so strongly that there really wasn't an argument for DeAndre Hopkins to be a top 5 receiver in the 2021 season anymore, and people were still saying that he was. And it's kind of come to be the proof in the pudding over the few years, but Brandon Beane hasn't been able to do that. If you look at an extended timeline for the Bills and look at their contracts out into 2027, they have an option with Diggs, but they still have Von Miller locked in for next season at a ridiculous number for what he's doing. And then the other hilarious thing about this is that you're almost supposed to get a hometown discount for signing a guy before he hits the open market. I mean, realistically, that's what should actually happen. There being certainty and signing a contract way ahead of you becoming a free agent. Should be meaning that you give up a little bit of your salary to make sure that you have your stuff for the future and you get some games in advance if you don't sign right before the offseason with your team. And Brandon Beane has thrown out contracts to guys where it's like Dawson Knox is a great example of it. I love Dawson Knox, but Brandon Beane's the king of overpaying just the wrong players. There's no way Dawson Knox was going to get what he gave him on the open market. And when Brandon Beane had his end-of-season press conference the other day, one of the things he pointed back to was the fact that the salary cap from the 2020 to 2021 season moved in the wrong direction for one season in there. I may be saying the years wrong, but it moved in the wrong direction around that time. And basically said that screwed everything up, and that's why we're $40 million over the cap at this point. But I think that's the wrong way to construct rosters. And I think especially kind of almost going back to what happened on the fake punt game the other day with Damar Hamlin. It's really hard for the guys, especially maybe in Buffalo for whatever reason, because it feels like such a close-knit community, to be able to distinguish like what is the correct move emotionally versus what's the correct move to actually win. Like the fact that the fake punt, they could have designed a fake punt very well against the Chiefs, but the fact that they felt the need to get the ball to Damar Hamlin especially, and he kind of danced around, and I mean the Chiefs had bad numbers on the field if what I've been hearing is correct. That's just not he's never been a guy who's carried the ball. I mean, if he gets it, it's going to be a glorious moment. We know that was going to be the last game, the last home game the Bills had there after what happened last season with Damar. It would have been tremendous. But it just feels like sometimes within the organization, and like I said, I've been leaning more positively towards McDermott recently than Brandon Beane. It feels like they've been making the wrong decisions. Now, the same thing could be said for Beane that was McDermott, is they're learning from their stuff. But Beane's been signing guys like Trent Murphy since he came in at ridiculous numbers that no one else was going to pay him just to have vets on the roster. He did the same thing with Von Miller recently enough, and Von Miller, for his cap charge, has not nearly been anything that the Bills should be proud of. And with what Diggs is probably going to do next season if he stays on the team, it's not going to be pretty. And then the Bills have an out of the contract after next season. And I'm not even sure that they're going to be able to look at it rationally enough to let him go unless he's the one who wants out. I don't think Brandon Beane is going to be the one to say, oh no, we won't take the out with you, Stephon. I have a really hard time seeing that. If Stephon wants to stay, he probably will get it. He'll probably also know that he's not going to get that from another team. I mean, people aren't even going to trade for his current contract knowing that they have an out next year. Like, I don't even think people would want him for 1 year knowing that. Just with that it's a ridiculously high cap charge. And it's really the other thing that's a sentiment that people really want to talk about existing. And it's really hard to believe it, is saying things like the quote that the cap isn't real. The cap is real. And there's ways to move money around to make things, be able to extend it out over time. But you don't want to be in that position. It's a horrible position. You, realistically, I think if I said there are 8 guys on the 49ers that are like A to A plus talent levels, I think those are the only guys that you should really be talking about having contracts that are 3 years or more. If you're not sure if a guy's that, don't extend him out that long. I mean, the fact that Von Miller and Stephon Diggs could be on the team for the next 4 years each, making the numbers they're at, which together is going to add up to probably like 20% of the cap or something like that over that time. It's just wild. And it's really hard to believe that that's where we are. But with that being said, I just complained about all that stuff. But let's talk about like what actually can be done in the future here to fix what's gone wrong. The number one thing is they got to drop money. In the future, if they have money to spend, they should spend it on guys going into their second contract and not their third contract. I'm just thinking about not Josh Allen, the quarterback, but Josh Allen, the defensive end, is going to become a free agent this year. And if we had money to get him boy, that would be nice. But that's obviously not going to happen. We're nowhere near a monetary situation where that's going to happen. So a few years down the line, if Brandon Beane's still in charge, he needs to drop the age that he's looking at the guys to give the big money to. If he finds those 30-year-old guys that really you can get for a deal and you're not overpaying for, because he's loved to overpay them, do it later on. Wait until it gets deeper in free agency to do that. But let's spend most of our money on those guys going into the second contracts. And then the other thing. Last year's draft was tremendous, and I was really happy that somebody asked it at either the Brandon Beane or the Sean McDermott press conference yesterday, because I was extremely excited when the Bills went after Dorian Williams in the third round last year. They hit on their picks very well this year. Later round picks, I'm not really referring to. I'm basically just thinking about the first 3 rounds, because realistically, those are the more important ones. Like, if you get lucky on a flyer and a guy in the 4th through 7th round, that's great, but that's not where you can rely on it. I mean, your percentage chances just drop off a cliff. And to be honest, before this last year, Kincaid looked great. Osiris Torrance was awesome. And going back to Dorian Williams, finally, somebody asked in the press conference why he didn't play more. It was basically just like, well, we saw what happened with Terrell Bernard when he was a rookie, and we wanted to give him more time. That's awesome. But I think Dorian's going to be a good player too. And with that momentum we got from last year's draft, being that we hit on all those early picks, and we'll see how the other guys develop, and maybe I'm forgetting somebody else from the draft class that did well, but I'm just focusing on those guys right now. If we can continue that momentum in the draft, as opposed to getting guys like, just being honest, Kaiir Elam, because he hasn't even seen the opportunity to see the field, really. Got a playoff interception, but I don't like to see some more consistency regardless of that being the case. If we can build on that, this team where they can really have a better chance to compete for the Super Bowl. Because I have to be honest, being 2 games away from the Super Bowl doesn't feel too much like competing for the Super Bowl. I know we were close to beating the team this year, 2 years ago, and 3 years ago. We were in the title game. The fact that was the closest we've gotten in the last 4 years was 4 years ago, depending on how I reference it, referring to the 2020 season. That's pretty embarrassing that the roster's progressed like this. You can almost wipe off the 2022 season because of just the distress the team was dealing with. But even if we wipe that one out, we've had 2 other seasons to deal with it. We need to get back on track. But, like I said, there is hope. Beans progressed drafting well. I think when we get money with the salary cap in the future, if we can spend it right on the guys going into their second contracts that are really especially fighting to be those A players in the league and not 30-year-old players who are obviously on the decline, I think there's really something to be said for the future of the Bills. And I'm not losing faith as a Bills fan. It does kind of suck to get to the point as a Bills fan where you're not surprised with the loss, but knowing what I saw in the draft last year could happen this year. And then our general manager learning from his mistakes, like I think NFL coaches can, then I think we'll be set up in the near future. And last but not least, I'd like to say, as a student at Florida State University, I think it's very important to say that it would just be absolutely marvelous if the Bills could pick up Keon Coleman in the draft this year. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.